Midnight breathes along Hampton Court, and the torches answer with little coughs of smoke. You smooth the silk at your wrist's smile. Small and harmless as a door you were told to avoid, eases open on iron hinges. A page boy bows too deeply. A gentleman waits in the hush beyond. Not the king, not your confessor. Someone the palace only says by whispers, after vespers, Culpeper. Your heart stutters like a moth against glass. You were warned, never walk this corridor after the bell. Never meet a gaze that belongs to any man but the one with a crown. But warnings are prayers without teeth, and tonight your shoes scarcely make a sound on the stone. Behind you, incense from the chapel lingers sweet, innocent, useless. Ahead, the room is candlelit and careful, a table laid with fruit that no one will eat. The air tastes of apples and iron. You smile again, because a queen's smile is armor and invitation both. And because you are 19, and because being adored feels like waking from drowning. Somewhere, a latch clicks. Somewhere, a scribe lifts his pen. In the galleries above, someone is listening for footsteps, counting them, deciding if they mean sin or mistake. A breath, then another. Your pulse slows to the rhythm of danger. You tell yourself it is only talk, only comfort, only a hand you needed in a palace, where love is a debt. You do not see the shadow moving in the hall. You do not hear the word taking shape in a man's mouth charges. You only feel the silk, the heat, the nearness, the terrible mercy of being seen. The door behind you closes like a verdict. Tonight, you will know why. You learn quickly that a crown is not a circle. It is a trap. By autumn of 1541, Hampton Court smells of crushed rosemary and oiled iron, of beeswax that never quite melts, of fear dressed as etiquette. The king is no longer the whirlwind who broke his nation to seize a bride. He is broader, slower, a man whose leg will not heal and whose temper begins where other men's ends. His courtiers move like the tide forward when he smiles, backward when his pain bites. You move with them, silk swishing, a small constellation of ladies in, waiting, orbiting your steps, as if proximity were salvation. You know the chronicle facts, because the palace repeats them like a prayer it hopes will become true. Henry VIII, King of England and France, defender of the faith, despite tearing the faith in two. His only son, little Prince Edward, born of Jane Seymour, and defended by a country still measuring its future in inches of swaddling. You, Catherine, fifth among wives, a Howard girl who was supposed to be light, not lightning. The tapestries whisper dates. The stone remembers names. You are expected to smile, to dance, to be spring where the king's body keeps becoming winter. Fear, here, is administrative fear. It arrives as schedules and lists, as names written in neat columns by men who never raise their voices. The Lord Privy Seal bows. The Archbishop writes a letter and folds it twice. Thomas Cranmer's pen ticks like a little clock. Inquiry, interview, confession. Pages scurry with notes that could end lives if read aloud at the wrong hour. You laugh at supper. Later you realize the laughter was recorded, weighed, set against you. It is astonishing how much silence can be documented. Rumor hangs low over the Privy Garden like mist. They say your smile lingers too long in galleries. They say a gentleman's hand once brushed yours beneath the arrows, and you did not move away. They do not need to see. They only need the right sequence of footsteps, the right servant at the right keyhole, the right phrase drawn from a trembling memory. My lady bade me keep counsel. Some speak a name Culpeper with a softness that sounds like prayer. Others say an older woman in your room's clever, brittle, half broken by her own hystericatory's messages, because she mistakes boldness for bravery. They call her kinswoman and friend. They call her instrument. You call her comfort when the rooms are too large. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. At the king's table you are sunlight in a chamber built for storms. You pour him wine with hands that do not tremble. He watches you as if you were applause. The musicians play softly enough that the king's breath is louder than the lute. Your task is to make the air easier to breathe. When his leg aches, you distract. When his pride aches, you vanish long enough for him to miss you. Love, at this altitude, is measured in how well you anticipate pain. Yet the city beyond the gates hums with another measure. They remember Catherine of Aragon's patience and Anne Boleyn's blade. They remember Jane Seymour's son and brief light. They mutter about Anne of Cleves with a compassion that sounds like laughter and annulment wrapped in courtesy. They have already placed you somewhere between ghost and lesson. You are young, and that is either your shield or your sentence. On Sundays you kneel in the chapel, incense turning the air sweet, as if sweetness could forgive ambition. The stained glass spills jeweled light over your fingers. You pray for dull things, continued peace, good humor, a night without questions. You do not pray for love. Love is too bright a word for a court that squints at brightness. Instead, you ask for quiet. Quiet is power that does not need applause. In the watching corridors, ambassadors walk slow so their letters can be believed. They carry home portraits of the king that will be copied, adjusted, softened by flattery and distance. None of those paintings will show the pulse in his temple when the ulcer flares, or the particular tilt of his head when he is not yet angry but could become so if the next sentence displeases him. You learn that survival depends on detecting whether inside a man. The fact that matters is simple and not simple. You hold the king's attention in a year when winter comes early. It is a gift wrapped like a debt. For the moment, he adores you. For the moment, he calls you his rose without thorns. For the moment, the kingdom's breath evens out when you enter a room. But the court does not believe in moments. It believes in ledgers. At night, the palace changes color. The red brick deepens to a brown that remembers rain. The river talks to itself. A line of torchlight stitches the outer ward like a seam being closed. From your window you can see the lantern in the watching chamber. Someone is awake who counts other people as mistakes. You think of Culpeper then, without meaning to, of the way his name moves through the household like the scent of apples in Strachlo, inevitable, domestic until it isn't. You think of the older woman, the one whose advice feels like a hand guiding you through a crowd. You wonder which hands open which doors at midnight, and whether a smile can ever be just a smile when written down by a clerk. You tell yourself the law favors the crown you wear. You forget that law is a door, and doors open both ways. Before you were a queen, you were a girl in a crowded house that smelled of rushes and winter kitchens. The Dowager Duchess kept a great household where music mixed with mischief, where lessons were half heard through laughter, where locks were faulty and guardians too tired to guard. Silk arrived there as scraps, not gowns. Love, as whispers behind screens. You learned early that attention is a currency spent fast, counted slowly. There was a music master who touched your fingers longer than scales required. A young gentleman who said your name as if it were a secret only he could keep. Their words were ribbons bright, inexpensive, easy to knot. You were not taught the art of saying no to a world that pretended not to hear it. In that dormitory of giggles and candle ash, you mistook being wanted for being safe. The wound formed there, the belief that warmth owed you nothing except the moment. Years later, when the king's eye fell upon you, the house of your childhood did not vanish. It came with you, hidden under pearls. You tried to stand perfectly still, so the past would not rustle. But courtiers come from the same world you do, only sharper. They know the way a hand lingers when a memory returns. They know what to ask servants who once kept the night watch. Fact plants its foot. In July 1540 you married Henry VIII, a wedding stitched to the end of an annulment no one dared name aloud. Thomas Culpeper served in the king's privy chamber, quick with errands and doors. By autumn 1541, letters and confessions began to move like mice through wainscoting. Archbishop Cranmer would set down a paper for the king to find after prayers. These are the ledger lines. They do not sing, and yet the tune is all rumor. Rumor says an old name from the dormitory followed you, Francis de Rem, claiming he knew your heart first, your promises first, your signature on air first. Rumor says a lady-in-waiting with a talent for survival, your kinswoman, Jane, once Boleyn by marriage, could guide a queen through midnight like a maid through crowded streets. Rumor says the music master never forgot your hands. It says a smile at the wrong hour becomes a contract written on breath. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. You tell yourself you are reformed by silk and sacrament. You keep the king's hours, learn his medicines, soothe the leg that burns like a brand from heaven. You measure your voice to the room, sweetened to the exact taste of a man who wants youth without its thunder. You think rule is a garden if you water it with patience, but the wound remembers. It opens when fear opens it. Being adored by a king is a highlight too bright to live in every hour. On the dimmer hours you ache for a gaze that sees the girl, not the emblem. A voice that isn't tallying airs while you speak. You mistake comfort for innocence because you are tired of being a symbol. You permit a corridor after Compline, a breath where the world grows smaller, a hand not royal because it is not royal, and therefore safer in the imagination. The court does not imagine, it records. Doors become witnesses, pages become archivists of footfall. The narrow stair remembers each descent. A folded note, nothing more than words, and wax becomes iron. Those who dislike your uncle's faction sharpen piety into questions. Those who envy your place sharpen memory into statements. Even those who pity you discover how profitable pity can be when written down in careful ink. On a winter morning, you watch frost climb the glass like silver ivy. For a moment, you feel forgiven by the light. Then you notice the shadow of a man in the corridor below, standing too still for a servant. The frost keeps climbing, so do the questions. The girl from the crowded house has not vanished. She is only better dressed. The crown does not change what you needed. It only raises the price of needing it. Names travel faster than footsteps at court. His has the sound of oiled hinges. Thomas Culpeper, groom of the Privy Chamber, a man permitted where air is thin and candles must not sputter. He moves in a corridor the king calls his own fetches velvet at midnight, delivers medicines steeped in wine and clove, carries words the way careful men carry blades. You should never know such a man well. You know him too well. The bond begins, as all forbidden things do, with errands that feel like mercy. A question about the king's leg answered softly. A message about a hunting time spoken too close. He is fluent in the quiet required to live near power. You are fluent in the courtesy required to live inside it. Silk speaks. Iron listens. Somewhere inside that listening, a door opens. Facts stand like sentries. In the summer of 1541, the royal progress turns north through Lincoln, Pontefract, Yorker, moving palace of trumpets by day and whispers by night. You smile from gilded barges and carved litters, while the kingdom measures your youth with its eyes. The streets smell of wet wool and roasted meat. Processions of aldermen kneel until their knees learn stone. The king accepts keys to the cities with a hand that trembles more from pain than magnanimity. You shine, you must shine. And yet, between receptions and masses, there are hours braided with another thread. Rumour says, a cousin, at your elbow Lady Rochford. Jane Bulling keeps time like a clock hidden beneath velvet. She knows a servant who knows a stare, a guard who favours a bribe, a gallery that empties after Rumour says she carries words between you and Culpeper, the way a nurse carries a sleeping child close, careful, believing she is helping you live. Rumour says her own history with love and ruin has broken something that now bends toward risk. Rumour is cruel. It remembers Anne's blade and decides the living still owe it blood. You tell yourself you are only asking for reassurance that the king's temper will ease, that your future can fit in this body, that you are not merely young but beloved. You tell yourself you are practicing innocence in a room without witnesses. You tell yourself you are stronger when someone sees you as a girl rather than a queen. Secrets love such sentences. They nest in them. They hatch at Pontefract. The progress pauses under skies the color of pewter. A chest of letters arrives late. You sign without reading, and the world proves later that you signed your name in more than ink. In York, the city spreads itself like a feast before a sovereign who chose his own church. Bells swing until the air tastes of brass. You stand at the king's right. You say the right words, but that night the right words feel like costumes, and the wrong ones feel like skin. He waits in a chamber that smells of rushes and apple peel. The candlelight makes a chapel of common things, a stool, a folded cloak, the shadow of your hands. Lady Rochford's breath is the door's last sound before it shuts. The first silence is a kindness. Nothing is asked of you but to be looked at as if crowns were made of human hours rather than metal. You speak of nothing and everything, the king's medicine, the cold in the galleries, the way geese sound on the river at dusk. It is almost domestic. It is almost harmless. Almost as a cliff you do not see until your heel hangs over it. The court's paper world keeps building itself while you dream of rooms with fewer names. On All Saints' Day, the 1st of November, 1541, Archbishop Cranmer places a folded letter where the king will find it after prayers at Hampton Court. Ink becomes iron. The inquiry, already breathing, finds a stride. Pages move like ants with crumbs of conversation. Stewards repeat remarks they once called sweet. A frightened girl from your youth remembers a winter in the Dowager S house with too much accuracy. The undercroft of a kingdom clerks, ushers, men who wear keys, begins to hum. Doors acquire ears. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation. But the private letters from that winter suggest something else. You meet him again because the first meeting solved nothing. You meet him because questions multiply in empty rooms. You meet him because being good is an arithmetic. You are not taught how to subtract warmth without subtracting breath. Lady Rochford looks thinner by candlelight, as if the plan itself were eating her. Only a word, she whispers. Only a word and courage. She intends salvation. She manufactures evidence. He asks nothing treasonous. He asks if you are cold. He asks if you are afraid. He asks if he can write to you in a hand no one will recognize. He asks if the king sleeps. The questions are domestic as folded linen until a single noun tips them toward the scaffold. Promise. Promise is a word that sounds like prayer until law writes it down. The bond is not a kiss. The bond is a habit of glances, of corridors, of hours misnamed comfort. It grows like ivy, slow, decorative, then strangling the stone that made it beautiful. You do not hear the sound of its weight until it pulls something down. When the progress turns south, the days shorten. The river smokes in the mornings. You return to Hampton Court, where the bricks seem warmer and the eyes much colder. You walk through your chambers, touching objects lightly, a prayer book, a comb, a tasselers, if they could vouch for you. The king is distant, wrapped in furs and counsel. The corridors are crowded with men who look as if they are listening even when they are not. Somewhere beneath your feet, a clerk sharpens a quill. You tell yourself there was no sin, only solace. The kingdom tells itself there was treason, because treason is measurable, and solace is not. The line between them will be decided by men who were not present, by paper that never sleeps, by a winter that has already chosen its verdict, and is now only waiting for the snow. Morning at Hampton Court arrives in velvet gloves. The light is soft, the voice is softer, and every kindness has a hinge. A maid replaces your rushes too carefully. A yeoman bows, and does not straighten as fast as yesterday. A cup of spiced wine appears, then does not, as if comfort were now contraband. Silk remains where iron has already been invited. That is how power moves when it wants you to relax your throat before it measures it. Control, here, prefers ceremony to clamor. Orders travel by parchment, not by shout. The king hunts 3 rooms away while the Privy Council hunts in yours. They begin by staging order, a polite request for your prayer book, a temporary removal of your music, a note that your ladies will be reassigned for efficiency. You sign a paper acknowledging an inventory of your jewels, and in the moment ink kisses vellum you realize the pen is a net and your name is the fish. Fact keeps its posture. All Saints' Day, the 1st of November 1541, Archbishop Cranmer leaves a folded letter after the king's devotions, setting inquiry in motion. Within days, Thomas Cranmer questions you at Hampton Court, not as priest but as instrument. The council examines Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper. By mid-November you are removed to Syon, comfort, renamed custody. These are the steps the kingdom writes down so the kingdom can forgive itself. Rumor moves with its usual appetite. They say a box from your girlhood has been found, a hoard of letters, trifles, tokens pressed like flowers between past and pulse. They say a maid whispered that someone once called you wife before a king did. They say a cousin guides your evenings with clocks only she can hear. That Lady Rochford counts doors instead of beads. And they add a name Derham with the relish of men, adding spice to a stew they intend to serve cold. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation. But the private letters from that winter suggest something else. Silk is still used in the staging. You are asked to sit by the window because light is soothing. Chairs are placed for men who will not sit. The Lord Chancellor speaks your name as if it were a line item on a tithe. Cranmer calls you daughter, the way a surgeon might murmur steady before he cuts. He is kind, which is worse. Kindness lowers the guard that fear could never lower. He says confession is a door to mercy. You think, what door have we not already opened? You try the old defenses, composure, charm, the smile that once turned winter toward June. They look at the smile as a specimen. They docket it. One asks if you have ever promised anything to Francis Derham that could be mistaken for marriage. Another wonders whether you have met Culpeper privately, and, if so, whether the door was bolted. A third does not ask a question at all. He reads a list of dates, as if dates were deeds. You learn a new measure of power. how thoroughly silence can be described. Hampton Court performs its part. The galleries are swept twice. Tapestries are straightened until saints look bored of blessing. The royal clocks are wound by men who never lose count. In the watching chamber, a log is placed on the fire with the ceremony of a christening. Every visible thing behaves as if the king's house were incapable of error. Only the small things betray the weather. The way a guard's gauntlet squeaks when he tightens his fist. The way a scribe licks his quill twice before writing the word admitted. The way a lady's eye will not meet yours when she says, "Her Majesty will rest now." The traps are quiet. First, they offer you a script. If you say you were careless as a girl, the present might forgive you as a woman. If you agree that affection once touched your hand before sacrament, the sacrament might yet cover it like snow. If you admit to foolishness, they can file it under past and keep the future for the king. Law loves tidy drawers. It hates the kind of love that looks current. You ask for counselor, uncle. Your house. The reply arrives as etiquette. Family will only inflame feeling. Priests will only cloud policy. Rest will help your memory find its honesty. Rest, you discover, is a new word for isolation. Your ladies are exchanged like coins until only the cold ones remain. The maid who knows your breathing is sent to serve a dowager you will never see. Doors begin to prefer keys. In the evenings you are still allowed music, but only from the far end of a corridor, like a memory learning to be quiet. A single cup is set where to once were. The steward's bow contains bad weather. The air smells of oranges you cannot touch, and wax that drips in perfect, pitiless lines. You keep your posture because it is the only territory you still govern. You discover how much of queenliness is choreography, hand here, chin there, silence in this exact size. They bring you gifts of phrasing to try on like garments. Misdemeanor, lightness, youthful ignorance. Each is a silk that might soften iron. Each, if worn, has a thread that leads to the men you would implicate to save yourself. Dirham, first tall flame, rebranded as ash. Culpeper, next domestic aid, rebranded as approach. Last, always last, the woman who guided the knights, Lady Rochford. The court prefers its lessons to come with female faces. You make a mistake you cannot see, because it looks like mercy. You say you never loved Culpeper. You only spoke. You say Dirham called you wife when you were no one's wife. You think you are drawing a circle around the present with a chalk that rain can take. They copy your circle in ink. On a raw morning the river hisses at its banks. A messenger rides out under a sky the color of unpolished pewter. You are told the king has gone to mass and found no peace there. You are told you will go to Syon, where the air is gentle and the rule gentler, and where no one will disturb you, while Parliament thinks Syon is a convent broken into a palace. Its stone knows how to keep women quiet. Your bed will be clean. Your letters will be cleaner. Men will decide which sentences belong to you. As you prepare, a small procession forms around your things. Prayer book, comb, rosary. The lace you do not wear, because lace looks flamboyant in November. The steward checks your casket for tokens. A ribbon falls out the color of overripe cherries. He writes ribbon in a hand that will survive you. The list is the trap. The list is always the trap. You take a last look at Hampton Court, at its brick that warms an afternoon, at the clock that refuses to change its face, at the garden where you learned how to walk, like an answer rather than a question. The house does not look back. Houses do not look back. They keep the eyes given to them by men with keys. The coach smells of damp wool and old prayers. Your hands find each other in your lap and make a church out of 10 small bones. You want to ask the world for a word you can still use. Not love, not innocence. Something like mercy, but without the price the court intends to charge for it. The road to Syon is smooth because the kingdom wants you to arrive unbruised. Paper prefers its subjects unblemished. It makes the ink look cleaner. Syon keeps its promises, clean sheets, quiet corridors, a courtesy that tastes of lime water until the night the quiet changes temperature. The candles burn lower. The sisters' footsteps fade. The Thames mutters to reeds like a witness rehearsing. A bell somewhere one you are not meant to hear strikes the hour, and the door opens, not with a knock, but with policy. Men step in with parchment folded to corners sharp enough to cut. They bow, as if to say mercy, and read, as if to say verdict. Fact stands first. In mid-November 1541 you were removed from Hampton Court to Syon. Inquiries deepened. By early December, Thomas Culpeper and Francis Dirham were condemned. Culpeper beheaded, Dirham hanged, drawn and quartered. Parliament prepared a bill that would make your guilt the king's law. The words arrive at Syon ahead of winter, wrapped in seals. They do not warm the room. They tell you Durham has confessed more than prudence allows. They tell you Culpeper has admitted to a purpose unbecoming. They do not say how purpose becomes proof when men write it down. They do not need to. A clerk unfolds another sheet and the air turns narrower. Rumour sits on the end of your bed, uninvited, suddenly remembered with perfect clarity by servants who once forgot everything. It says Lady Rochford ferried whispers through privy galleries. It says a bolt slid home and the king's house learned what doors are for. It says an old vow from a dowager household returned like a debt collector and knocked with both hands. Rumour describes your breath by number, your glances by weight, your pauses by the cost they will fetch at Westminster. It names nights, rooms, even fruits in bowls, as if figs could testify. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. They ask you to write. You take the quill, and feel the quill take you. Ink is a little winter crawling across the page. You begin with what the godly choose for such hours: truth, staffed by caution, apology, staffed by hope. You say Durham called you wife before you were a wife. You say Culpeper never had what rumour sells. You say you were foolish. The men nod the way surgeons nod when a limb is already forfeit. A question follows with the softness of a pillow. Did you intend ever to love where law had already chosen? The room awaits a single word that fits in a noose. From the courtyard comes the iron clatter of a bridle. And you remember that today in London a scaffold was washed not for you, not yet, but for men who once spoke your name lightly. The knowledge crosses the floor like a draught. Your hand shakes once. Somewhere a scribe writes the sentence he wanted to write before he heard your answer. My ending was already signed. You do not know you have said it aloud until the faces tell you so. It is not despair. It is recognition, as if you have at last caught up to the date on their paper. On the 10th of December 1541, the city cheered less than it used to. Winter deafens even blood. A messenger rides, carrying the echo of crowds to Syon, where the walls prefer Latin. The men fold their sheets with satisfaction that passes for sorrow. They rise. Etiquette bows the room closed. Later, when the sisters bring bread and warm milk, you find your voice attempting to be practical. Which chest may I keep? Which rings may I send to my mother's house? Practicality is a kind of bravery that cannot be applauded. In the grate a piece of charcoal splinters like a small star. You put out your hand to the heat and draw it back, not from pain, but from the memory of a single hour at Hampton Court when heat had another name. Night gathers its skirts. A guard coughs and does not bother to hide it. You lie down fully dressed, as if the world might ask you to stand at any moment, as if a queen were only a signal waiting to be lit. In the next room, a clerk caps his ink. The decision roosts on the beam and goes to sleep, certain it will wake where it left itself. Erasure does not arrive like thunder. It arrives as handwriting. Your world is unmade by quills that never raise their voices. First, the lists, household roles are corrected in a neat, unfaltering hand. Her Grace's becomes the Lady Catherine. Wages reassigned, liveries recolored. A clerk draws a line through a name you kept near you at Hampton Court and writes a different name, smaller, as if the new loyalty must learn to whisper. Then, the rooms. The privy chamber is measured for a different centerinch water instead of rose. Tapestries are rehung so saints turn their faces to a future that will not include you. A jewel coffer is opened and the bee of your initial shivers in a man's palm before it disappears into a sack-marked crown. The seamstress is told that black looks better on February light. A music book is placed back on the shelf with a thud that means not now, and then, never again. Facts are brief and stunkled. On the 13th of February 1542, at the Tower, you die by the sword swift, as the kindness of kings allows, and with you dies Jane, Lady Rochford, whose counsel turned corridors into evidence. There is no public trial. Parliament's Bill of Attainder has done what trials sometimes fail to do: decide before the questions get inconvenient. Your confession is not a verdict. The verdict was a calendar appointment. London receives the morning like any other barrels rolled, shutters lifted, then slows at the rumour of a scaffold washed at dawn. Some look away because looking takes sides. Some look on because watching is the only power they will ever have. The ravens do what ravens always do. They remember. At court, policy puts on mourning and gets back to work. A secretary drafts letters to ambassadors with phrases that have been polished by centuries of sorrow. God's justice has moved. The king, though grieved, governs with fatherly zeal. An inventory of Syon is balanced to the penny. A groom of the stole is reminded to burn the scraps of ribbon that once matched your gown. The king's physicians note that His Majesty slept tolerably after prayers. History, reported from within the engine that made it, sounds very much like bookkeeping. Outside the engine, rumor refuses the ledger. It says you confessed bravely. It says you asked for a block so you would not tremble. It says you practiced your words, then gave them to the morning without a tremor. It says you spoke of your sins and your soul and of mercy words that travel faster than warrants because no seal can slow them. It says Lady Rochford was ill and still brought to the axe because policy hates incompletion. Rumor is cruel, but sometimes it is accurate because cruelty likes to repeat itself until paper learns the tune. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. Erasure continues, patient as frost. The arms above your door are repainted. The Howard badge vanishes from places where it used to catch afternoon sun. The beds are turned. The linen is aired. A new laugh practices itself in the long gallery. A portraitist reuses a panel because oak is dear and memory cheaper. The Queen's motto is filed away under a different Queen's name, as if words could be inheritance when women are not. Servants trade their knowledge like coin. Which stare goes where, which glance means danger, which silence means safety. They will serve again because surviving is a service to, and yet erasure never completes its own work. A beadle at Syon remembers how you touched the beads of a rosary like steps on a difficult hill. A laundress at Hampton Court remembers the peach stain you left on a cuff because the king finally laughed. A boy in the privy kitchen remembers the order for spiced wine that came and did not come. They do not write any of this down, and so it survives where ink cannot, in the place where breath stores stories. The king's house heals itself by insisting it was never wounded. The great clock keeps time as if time were innocent. The river answers with its usual answer. It goes on, but something remains, even in a world trained to forget the shape of a young woman's life, when it endangers the shape of a nation's pride. A shutter creaks at Hampton Court, and someone hears it as a memory instead of a hinge. A winter visitor to the tower pauses at the green patch and cannot say why his throat tightens. A clerk closing a register wonders whether a line can truly close a life or only close a book. The council of erasure is simple procedure, so a new court proceeds. Rooms are rearranged to fit a future that will always be slightly smaller because you once walked there. The law writes itself another congratulation for having been so exquisitely punctual. The chronicle reduces you to an adjective that suits the argument of the day: light, wanton, warning. All of those words are cheaper than the cost of admitting how desire and policy keep folding into each other until both forget their names. In quiet hours the palace performs penance the only way palaces can, by perfecting their polish. Rushes are sweeter, brass is brighter. Silence arrives on time. But polish is not absolution. It is only the face history wears when it refuses to look at itself. Somewhere in the archives, a bundle of council notes lies under a ribbon gone the color of old cherries. Somewhere in a gentleman's casket, there is a key with nothing left to open. Somewhere a line from a chaplain's diary tries not to sound like pity and fails. You were told once that a crown is a circle. It was not. It was a sentence with too many authors. Now your story belongs to those who need it, to warn, or scold, or sleep. The court would prefer that it belonged to no one. It files the papers and locks the drawer. Even now, there is a sealed letter they refuse to release. Breathe. Let Hampton Court grow small, a toy palace set upon the river's hush. The torches are only fireflies now. The iron that once sounded like verdict becomes harmless metal cooling in the night. You are not in the gallery, not in the watching chamber, not on the road to you are here, where candle smoke lifts like a prayer that forgot its sorrow halfway through the sky. Inhales low until your ribs loosen beneath the silk of your breath. Exhales low until the lists and letters slip back into their drawers. The names Cranmer, Culpeper, Durham drift like fallen leaves and settle quietly on water that refuses to keep a footprint. Even the ravens fold their wings. They remember, and you do not have to. A softer palace rises, not of brick and statute, but of small merciser, comb laid straight, a goblet of warm milk. A window cracked to let in the Thames. Somewhere a seamstress finishes one last stitch and snips the thread. Somewhere a bell counts the hour as if counting were a blessing. Let it be. You have earned an hour with no inventories, no questions, no doors that mean more than doors. If a crown returns, let it return as a circle of calm around your heartbeat. If a letter waits, let it wait unopened until morning. Tonight, the law is simple. Close your eyes, keep the light low, leave the past to its custodians. What mattered has already crossed the river. The last candle narrows to a quiet pearl. Its little flame bows, then reclines, then sleeps. The room cools, the stone is kind. The dark becomes a blanket with your name sewn inside. Rest. The palace can polish itself without you. Breathe in, breathe out. Good night.